about quilts and quilting and how you see them in math. So maybe the first question that I will ask is like, what is a quilt?
A quilt is a blanket at the end of the day, or a throw. It's something that
Mhm.
people put on their beds, or they put on the end of a sofa, or they just snuggle up under, maybe by themselves or with somebody on a slightly cold night. Quilts originated back in the United States, back during the days of slavery, where slave, mainly women, but people would gather old rags because they didn't have the opportunity for any new clothing or blankets, or most of the things that they should have had. And so they made patchwork quilts, started
Mhm.
to make blankets essentially out of old rags and batting, and probably horsehair and other sorts of things. And
Mhm.
so that was the beginning of the idea of taking cloth to make blankets, as opposed to simply constructing a blanket or a covering out of a single piece of fabric or wool. And um, and then, of course, it's become um, more widespread around the world, and there's a real tradition of quilting in many, many parts of the world. And you might call it something different, but a quilt today is considered something that has been constructed on the top with some type of design, and then has some batting, generally cotton, or sometimes a mixture of cotton and polyester, or other items, but some kind of a slightly cushioned batting in the middle.
Mhm.
And then the bottom is what we would call the back of the quilt. You could also sign on it, or it might be a single piece of fabric. And then those three pieces are laid on top of each other and then quilted, meaning that they're stitching through all three layers of those fabrics to
Mhm.
hold it together. And then it's generally bound on the outside with a strip of binding, generally from the same type of fabric. Or it could be, there could not have to be a binding, there might be a different type of finish. But a quilt is essentially a multi-layered blanket.
Mhm. That's something that actually I didn't know about until I started learning more about quilts. That like I had always thought about it as like the patchwork thing that you see on top. And I didn't really understand so much the artwork that went into the stitching lines that held the pieces together. And oftentimes those stitching lines, like that's a whole other piece of artwork in itself. And that's like the
Absolutely.
quilting, not yeah.
That's right. And quilters often have a favorite part of in the whole quilt making process. For some
Mhm.
people, it's just choosing a design and sometimes doing a bit of a riff on that.
Mhm.
There are lots, thousands and probably millions of patterns available to choose from, but you can choose one and just construct it that way,
Mhm.
or you can make some adjustments, or just start from scratch on your own. And so that's all about making the quilt.
I'm looking at it. It's interesting. Like I noticed some symmetry initially. Like I was even looking at like the far upper points of those wings, like being the same fabric. And then I was, kind of comparing points in, and I'm like, oh wow, same fabric. It wasn't just a choice. But then as I'm looking at it more and more, I'm noticing more symmetry. Like I'm noticing these kind of square shapes with dots in the middle, down and like throughout, actually. It's I could go on and on. I'm seeing more and more symmetry. So can you describe what you see in terms of symmetry or patterns?
Absolutely. It is an extremely symmetrical quilt. And in fact, the pattern
Mm,
um, is
yeah.
based on the idea that so if there's a block, and I'll just zero in on a particular block. So
Hmm.
this orange one, this area
Wow. Yeah.
here, one block made up of a number of different fabrics that are quite similar. And here's the one on the opposite side. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's got it's still in that orange, but it's got a bit more purple in there. And that's because the fabrics that I used actually had quite large patterns. And when you have fabrics with larger patterns and you cut smaller pieces, sometimes you only get orange in one part of it, and you might get purple
Yeah.
in the other. It was the same
Yeah.
fabric that I used over here,
Yeah.
but different parts of the larger patterns
Hmm.
that are coming out. But the way the pattern works is that in the pattern book, they'll actually give you the pattern for both blocks on the two sides. and they're identical. So you make two of those blocks.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the shape takes place, in some cases, the
Oh,
block,
yeah, yeah, up there.
might go left, and on the other side it goes right, obviously
Hmm.
to because they're sort of opposite in a way, because this whole wing is going up to the right and this wing is going up to the left. So
Hmm.
so sometimes the pieces it's kind of a mirror image, if you will, in each case.
Hmm.
But all of the outside, well, in fact, all of the pieces within the two sides are identical, but they're just reversed. And then that just gives you the ability to make it look extremely symmetrical. Or if you choose to use different fabrics on different, on the two different sides, or mix and match, then you're going to lose little bit of the effect of the symmetry. I chose fabrics that had a bit of variety in them, so I knew it would look a little bit modeled. But you can see that I still made some choices, like up in the two top corners, it's mainly green. It comes
Hmm.
down to kind of pale blue in
Hmm.
towards the center, and then more
Hmm.
pink, and then orange, and then green and blue down at the edges. So I did, in fact, want it to look quite symmetrical.
Hmm.
So this is
Oh,
a quilt that I've recently put together, and it was from a
hmm.
pattern.
Beautiful.
And the blocks in the pattern were, you can see this triangle shaped thing.
Hmm.
Then this row of arrows,
Hmm.
this block with the diamond in it, and or the
Hmm.
triangle, and then the lines. So those were the three basic templates that I had from the pattern. But I decided I wanted to make it lap size instead of a full bed size, and so it was going to be shorter. I
Hmm.
also decided I wanted to use up lots of scraps that I had,
Hmm.
and um, and that I wanted to um, make a few adjustments in where I placed certain blocks. And there was also this large kind of largest block to contend with.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I made all those big ones, and then I had to decide how I wanted to fill them in all between. So I ended up doing a number of, so this block with
Hmm. Interesting.
the
Yeah.
flower, I just made that up because I needed to fill a space, that was X by X, because I had this one beside it,
Huh.
and these, and,
Uh-huh.
and then these all had certain borders. So they were all a certain size, and obviously you want to get to something that's a rectangle at the end of the day, or a square.